Hello there, and welcome to the channel. I'm not good at introductions, so let's just get to it. This channel is where I rate horror games on their effectiveness at being horror games. I also talk about a lot of other things too, mostly horror related. I rate things on a scale of 5, with 5 out of 5 meaning that I think it's a very good game, but a low score doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad game, it's just not a very effective horror game, or has flaws. I try to be fair to the point that some of my favourite horror games don't get very high ratings on my own scale. I'll never just give points for things or not give points without a lot of thought as to why, and to help you get acquainted, I'm just going to give you some examples from the 5 points that I use to rate horror content by. Atmosphere. Atmosphere is just about what you feel when you play. Is an environment creepy? Is there tension? Do you feel a sense of dread walking the corridors? Is there something wrong but you can't put your finger on it? Has the environment gone quiet and left an eerie silence? Does the place you're in seem real or not? Is there blood, guts and viscera hanging from the walls? Is there creepy music playing in the background that's making you feel uneasy? Did you just learn that a lot of people died here? Atmosphere is about feelings. How I rate this is by the amount of time you feel the atmosphere. If a game is only atmospheric some of the time, then it's unlikely to get the point.
Where the hell did he go? Hey! You still here?
The beast inside is split in two by 2 different characters. One of them has some really creepy sections that take place at night in a spooky mansion or during some mines, which is very atmospheric. It's foreboding, there are real jump scares that take place and it's tense anticipating them. But the other half of the game is mostly walking around large areas and forests solving puzzles, and the atmosphere wasn't really noticeable to me at all during these points. Part of me even found it boring. The duality is interesting, but it's difficult to say it's an atmospheric game when half of the time you feel nothing. Therefore, no points. Scares. Scares is pretty self-explanatory, but very subjective. It boils down to, did you find it frightening? Games use a lot of things from jump scares and scripted events to chase sequences, combat and cutscenes to try and frighten the player, and there's a lot of unique things in the medium now. But this section is the hardest to get right. Now, my determination of frightening may be different to yours because we're all frightened of different things. To me personally, Lisa's shadow in PT and the spiders in System Shock 2 are the most terrifying things in video game history. But that's not going to be the same for you. So whilst I can definitely identify when something frightens me, I try to be understanding for things that I think would be scary anyway. Unless something doesn't seem to function properly, is predictable, or has worn itself thin by that point. There's also pacing. If a game only has 1 or 2 frightening moments and the game is quite long, then it's also not going to get the point. So Lisa's shadow is only a brief moment in an hour-long game, but luckily the game has a lot of other things going on to make it frightening. And while System Shock 2 is a lot longer, it has me deal with the spiders more times than I'd like and has other things on top of that. So they both get the point. Psychological horror games like Silent Hill 2 and Alice Madness Returns get the point for being frightening, even if they have points that aren't traditionally scary, because the concept of what's going on is frightening. Whereas Layers of Fear 2 has a lot of bewildering things that sometimes come across as frightening, and sometimes come across as weird and pointless, because it presents them in quick succession, and its story is difficult to grasp, which makes the event sometimes seem meaningless and robs it of being frightening. This is the hardest section to judge, and it's always difficult to decide. Sound design. Sound design is both an artistic thing and a functionality thing. It encompasses music, sound effects, voice acting, dialogue, as well as how real locations sound with reverb, and if there's directional audio. If there's something in your right, can you hear it in your right ear? Sound design only really fails the point if things don't function properly or just come across as lazy. Amnesia Machine for Pigs has some great sound effects for the machinery, but they're played too loud to the point of being painful. The voice acting in Fatal Frame is wooden and makes the characters come across as robots. The voice acting in Anatomy is fantastic, but the distortion effect used over the dialogue makes some of it difficult to understand. Sound design has a big effect on the atmosphere, and when it's done properly it can be fantastic, and when it isn't, it sticks out quite badly or ruins moments. Generally, a game will get a point for sound design as long as it's competent. Gore. Gore is about how much blood, bodies, viscera, and other nasty things the game decides to show. Gore is another subjective one, and I basically rate it on whether it's appropriate, how much gore the game had and what it looked like, intentional or not. Most games it really means whether it's appropriate or not. Like Fatal Frame and Scratches, they're both essentially ghost stories, so blood and guts don't really have a place there. Getting a point for gore in games that doesn't have any gore is just that it didn't seem to need any. In Outlast 2, the amount of dead bodies and mangled corpses greatly outnumbers the possible human residents, and it becomes stale after a while. Whilst it's meant to be shocking, you just get desensitized to it as the game goes on, so in trying to up the ante constantly, you just end up ignoring it. The gore feels needless, and therefore I don't give it a point. It's rare for a game to present gore in a silly way or to have it just be unrealistic, to the point where I couldn't think of an example for this section, but it is something I take into consideration too. So all that really matters is that it's appropriate.
It always comes down to the hunter's helper to clean up after these sorts of messes. Tonight, Gammon joins the hunt.
Story. Finally, there's story, which usually covers the plot, diary entries, character progression, backstories, flavor text, and other things, as well as how it's presented. Since stories can be literally anything, the only time I won't give a point for story is if it's barely present and easy to forget about, if it's confusing, if it's poorly conveyed, or if the story is just really predictable in a way that isn't fun. Both Bloodwash and Dark Pictures' Man of Medan have very predictable stories. Bloodwash's story is something that felt a bit generic, but there's enough room for doubt on the things to come, and some genuine twists later on. Generally, it's also presented in a less serious way. It's similar to 80s and 90s slasher films that make its predictable story more palatable, so it gets the point. Man of Medan, on the other hand, is obvious from the start. You can tell what's happening very early, but the characters can't figure it out until near the end, which makes it frustrating to endure. No points. In Fatal Frame 3, there's tons of diary entries that explain all the various converging plot lines from the previous two games and all the characters that are involved with them, and it strings them all together neatly. And even if it is a lot to take in, they're never boring because of how they're presented as folklore tales, and they're sometimes chilling to read, which really helps the story. A game like Don't Be Afraid has a lot of diary entries, but they're often meaningless and allude to nothing. They don't seem to serve a purpose, and it's often confusing why anyone would bother writing them down. The story is sometimes subjective as to what feels cliché and what feels genuine, and it's often the hardest to make a proper assessment on, since some games have an overwhelming amount of notes and make some of them very important but also difficult to find. That's about it for that. I hope that clears things up and makes the point system make sense. Oh, and also the reason they're ranked by Harry Masons is because I thought it was funny. try to approach a lot of things objectively and to be as fair as I can be, and if there's a game that I really personally dislike, then I just won't cover it. My to-do list is unhealthily long, and I don't always play the latest games to cover them when they come out, but sometimes they'll be on Patreon for the patrons if you don't see them here. Every year I try and do 31 game reviews for every day of October to celebrate Halloween, and it's generally why I'm quite slow the rest of the year. And now for the links in the comments. On the side channel, I'll occasionally upload videos on smaller games, free games, mods, DLCs, and soundtracks for the other videos, so you can enjoy the music playlists on things like the Cosmic Horror series. There's links to the Discord where we talk about horror games, movies, and generally chat about what we liked and didn't like, and you're welcome to join in. The Patreon is but £1 and gives you access to all sorts of random videos, early access to the Halloween videos, progress updates, exclusive polls, and other things as a reward for supporting the channel, and I'm very grateful to all those who join in. It's there so I never have to put adverts on my videos, which I think would ruin the experience of watching my content. That's about it. I want to thank everyone who's been watching all this time from the very start to the people who just strolled in the door, and thank you. I'm still fairly small time, but I'm still stunned that I'm able to do this to such a welcoming audience. I hope this has helped, and I'll see you in the next video.